Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, welcome, my friends, to today's episode of Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, the one and only, the ever so beloved Todd Huff. It's a pleasure, my friends, to have you here. Thank you for tuning in today. If you want to be part of the conversation, I welcome you to reach out to us via text, 317-785-1030, 317-785-1030. You may have seen over the weekend that Bill Cassidy, Rhino Senator from the state of Louisiana, lost his primary. And it's not just that he lost his primary, my friends. There were 4 candidates running in this primary, and he finished. Are you ready for this? He finished third. He finished third in that primary, which is hard to believe, really. There are so many things. There are so many things that Trump has, and this modern political time frame that we're living in, I guess. There's so many things that are possible today that were not possible even, I don't know, a handful of years ago. Everything has been turned on its head. Conventional wisdom can be thrown out the window. I would say to you that there has never been a time in my lifetime and in modern political history where we are at the threshold of being able to actually get this country back on the right track in, well, very substantial, very significant ways. We'll talk about this today, my friends. Again, I appreciate you tuning in here today. You know, one of the biggest challenges that we as conservatives have is finding ways to ensure that our values align with the way that we live our lives. And that includes how we invest our money. I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with our faith and our values. So we're not funding things that go completely against what we believe in. This happens so frequently, and it can be stopped relatively easily with what 48 Financial is doing. They do the heavy lifting. You don't have to do a bunch of research and anything like that. All you have to do is complete a quick and easy assessment. I did the assessment. You can do it as well. It's not hard. It doesn't take a lot of time. Just go to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because your money should work for and certainly not against your values. Okay. Let's get started here today. Let's talk a little bit about what happened in Louisiana, and we'll talk also about what could happen in the state of Kentucky next. So let's start first with what happened in Louisiana. We'll start here. Here we go. This is an article from the Epic Times. Senator Cassidy loses Louisiana GOP primary as Trump-backed Representative Letlow advances to a runoff. So let me explain. There was a primary that was held in Louisiana. There were 4 candidates. The incumbent, Bill Cassidy, finished third out of 4 candidates in a Republican primary. Julia Letlow, she finished first with 44.8% of the vote. John Fleming finished second with 28.3% of the vote. Bill Cassidy, the incumbent, who Trump had targeted, who Trump had gone after, finished third. Mark Spencer was the 4th candidate, 8,000 votes. He finished fourth with 2.1%. Cassidy, if I didn't say, had 24.8%. So in Louisiana, you have to, in order to win the primary, you have to get at least half of the vote. So Letlow did not get half of the vote. She was close, but not enough. So what they do now is they take the top two candidates and they have a runoff election, a special election to determine the actual primary winner. And that's going to be, I thought I read June 27th. So let's just read this really quickly, or part of this article from the Epoch Times. Representative Julia Letlow and Louisiana Treasurer John Fleming ousted incumbent Senator Bill Cassidy in the Republican primary election in Louisiana on May 16th. This would have been Saturday. Letlow won more than 44.8% of the vote, while Fleming received 28.3%, Cassidy 24.8%, and according to the results, after 99% of the votes were tallied. Congratulations to Congresswoman Julia Letlow on a fantastic race, beating an incumbent senator by record-setting numbers, President Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social on the night of May 16th. Trump endorsed Letlow in January before she launched her campaign in a bid to dislodge Cassidy. He called the incumbent senator disloyal in a social media post on the morning of May 16th for running on a Trump platform and then voting to impeach the president. So that's important. You have a Republican senator who's on the record voting to impeach President Trump during his first term in Congress. Now, that's a big deal. Now, the term disloyal, boy, that stirs a lot of emotions, right? It's fascinating, right? You have congressmen, senators, political folks who will run on the idea that, hey, I'm not a puppet, right, of the administration, and you should be. You should be your own person. You should not. You should make your own decisions. Absolutely. I'm a big believer in that. I also believe that given what we are facing, especially given what we are facing in this country, many elected Republicans don't know what time it is. I like that is something Micah Beckwith said to me that I stuck in my mind. They don't realize what time it is here in this country. They don't realize that we are in a fight for the survival of this constitutional republic. They don't understand, they don't appreciate what it is we are dealing with, what we have to do, what we have to pull together to accomplish. And whether you call it loyalty, camaraderie, or just being focused on the mission that you were elected to carry out, this, in today's political climate, if you are being accused of being disloyal to President Trump, that means effectively to the voters that you are a rhino. You are part of the problem. You are maybe not even part of the problem. You are potentially the heart of the problem as it pertains to Republican Party politics. This again, as though there needs to be more signals to Republicans running for office that they should be very, very careful if they choose to go against the president. Now, if you want to be against the president on something here or there, I suppose that's fine, but it better not be. If you want to win, you had better be prepared for what's going to come. If you go against him on something he has deemed critically important or fundamentally necessary in the pursuit of his agenda, you had better be prepared for what's coming. And so Trump, as I go back to the article here, endorsed Letlow in January before she launched her campaign in a bid to dislodge Cassidy. He called the incumbent senator disloyal in a social media post the morning of May 16th for running on a Trump platform and voting to impeach the president. Letlow and Fleming will face off in a runoff election on June 27th, since neither received more than 50% of the vote. The winner of the runoff will likely go on to represent the state in the U.S. Senate. The Republican-leaning state has not had a Democratic senator since 2015. Both candidates have emphasized their alignment with the White House. Yeah, that's what they've learned. It's exactly what they've learned. During the campaign, Letlow described herself as a conservative fighter who will be more loyal to the administration priorities than Cassidy had been perceived to be due to a series of high-profile splits with Trump over the past several years. Louisiana made it clear tonight, we are ready for strong conservative leadership that will stand with President Trump and never waver, Letlow's campaign said in a statement after the election. Speaking at her victory party after the primary, Letlow described Trump as, quote, the best president this country has ever had. Cassidy's past vote to impeach him, Letlow said, was a sign that he had turned his back on the Louisiana voters. Likewise, Fleming posted positive comments from Trump, who called Cassidy's primary opponents two great people in a post on X, writing, thanks for the kudos, President Trump. So, just to go through this, we've had, in my state, a few weeks ago, Republican state senators who voted against redistricting, which was something that Trump heavily campaigned for. Trump pushed for very strongly, not just in this state, but in countries all around, in states all around the country. My Republican state Senate here, if you're a Hoosier, your Republican Senate, led by Republicans, voted against redistricting. And many of those folks who stood up against Trump, stood up against redistricting, are now finding themselves out of a job because they lost in the primary process. You have what happened in Louisiana. Bill Cassidy, this isn't a guy that, he's a pretty popular name in politics. This is not a guy who just came onto the scene this year or something. He's an established. He crossed Trump in a critical way, voting to impeach. Think about that. That is, again, when you know what you know, what many know anyway, about what's happening in Washington, D.C., this fight for control of our country, the weaponization of government and politics and everything else to go after Trump and, candidly, the American people. It's clear. It is clear that these folks are not well received. Those who go along with the shenanigans and the games, they are not well received by the Republican base. And good for that, I say. So you see, again, we had a couple of, a week or so ago when Republicans in South Carolina voted against redistricting there, choosing not to try to squeeze one more Republican seat out of their congressional delegation. There are Republicans was reported that there were 5 Republicans there that basically blocked that measure, and they had better be put on notice. I understand if these things are over principle, but again, as I've said to you before, what is the principle? What is the principle that these Republicans who oppose redistricting, mid-decade redistricting in their states, what is the principle they are standing up for? Because as I see it, it's only the principle of the status quo. It's only the principle that says we don't normally do that, right? There's an old analogy. I don't know where I read this or heard this. I might have read this in a book by Dave Ramsey, or I could have heard this from someone else, but I think it was in a book from Dave Ramsey. He tells the story of a recipe, I think it's Dave Ramsey, who had passed passed down a recipe for generations. Now, I'm going to paraphrase this. I might not get every detail right, but you get the main point here. There was a woman who was making some sort of pot roast or something using a crock pot. And the first thing she did was she cut the pot roast in half. She actually put it in 2 different crock pots. And someone had asked, why do you do that? And she said, well, I don't know. That's just how my grandmother did it. And so one day she calls up the grandmother, curious about this. She'd been thinking about it and wasn't sure why. And she said, Grandma, I've been, using your recipe for this pot roast. And I never really stopped to think about it before until one of the kids or my husband asked me why this had been, why I cut this in half. And I just never stopped to think about it. Why do we cut it in half? Why is that the way we do it? And she said, well, honey, the reason I cut it in half is because at the time when I was making the recipe, I could not fit the full pot roast in my crock pot. So there wasn't any real reason. I mean, there was a practical reason, but there wasn't some fundamental reason that said that was part of the process. And I have a strong sense that that's the opposition to redistricting. It's just the way it's always been done. They never stop to ask why. Why are the lines where they are today? Why is that something that is holy and sacred? Why can that not be changed? We're in the fight, again, I've said this before, for the survival of this constitutional republic. We are in the midst of a cold civil war. Surely we can reach a point where we can at least ask these questions, but they don't want to have the conversation. And so I think that there's a small group of people that just fall into that group that says, we don't know why we shouldn't redistrict. We just know that this isn't normal. The media is making a lot of noise about it when Republican states, red states, try to do it. And so let's just get along. Why can't we be fair? I tell my children, by the way, when they would say to me as little folks, Dad, that's not fair, I would tell them that is a 4-letter F word to their father's ears. Listen, I believe in justice and all that, but oftentimes this concept of fairness, it just doesn't compute for me. The old saying, life isn't fair. You probably had your mother or father say that to you when you were growing up. We should seek to desire justice, but fairness, it seems to often be something that we whine about and just don't. It's almost like a something that prevents us from dealing with the root problem because we can sulk in it and roll around and whine about it. But the reality is, it's absolutely why is it fair? Why is it fair to people, to young children who are led astray sometimes by government policies, things that have been implemented at the local school district? Why is it fair that we allow them to be abused and hypersexualized by the trans community? Why is that allowed to happen? Why is that fair to them? Why is it fair to unborn children for them to be massacred and murdered and sacrificed, literally sacrificed, in favor, or I guess in exchange for temporary sexual pleasure? Why? Why is that fair, my friends? I just think this whole concept of fairness is ridiculous. But regardless, when you stand against a movement, and you can say it's you can stand against Trump and you face the consequences of that, but you're also standing in the way of a movement that needs to be fulfilled. We need to have people who are in favor of and who are prepared to do the work necessary, may I add, to move this country in the right direction, back towards its constitutional roots, back towards liberty, back toward reasonable, just reasonable people. This country has lost its mind And it's partly, not completely, but there's a big part of it that is due to the stupidity that we see in politics today. We have real problems out there, and some of the problems that people like Bill Cassidy, some of the things they said were problems were not problems. The idea that Trump should have been impeached, especially now in hindsight, but even at the time that Trump should have been impeached and removed from office, is absolutely asinine. It is. And listen, I know that there are strong opinions on the other side, but it just none of it ever made sense. The absolute nonstop, incessant attacks on Trump, it's amazing how far we've let those go. But nonetheless, Cassidy has paid the political price. And now Trump is saying to Thomas Massie in Kentucky, it's time for you to go as well. And by the way, if you're out there campaigning for Massie, which Lauren Boebert is one of those Republican congresspeople from Colorado who's reportedly campaigning for Thomas Massie in Kentucky, Trump says, listen, I will withdraw my endorsement of you. If you want to choose to help Massie, who Trump calls the worst Republican congressman in history or some such thing. We'll get to that after the break. But anyway, this is we're in the season where people who have opposed Trump, who stood in the way of his agenda, who stood in the way of what he wants to see accomplished, and by the way, by extension, what millions and millions of Republican voters want to see accomplished, they are fighting, my friends, one heck of a battle in the primary season. So, friends, if you're dealing with discomfort or just tired of living off of prescriptions, managing those side effects, you are not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural that they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals. It's a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. No hype, no synthetics, no funny business, just the real thing done right. The key is that real kratom is tested. It's responsibly sourced. It's not synthetic. The horror stories are, when shady sellers produce and sell that shady synthetic garbage that isn't even real kratom. Start with their kratom starter pack. Coupon code Todd Huff saves you 10%. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. So we've talked about Cassidy here. Actually, let me read a little bit more of this article that's a little bit further down. Cassidy and Trump. Although Trump endorsed Cassidy's previous re-election bid in 2020, the two men have been politically divided often publicly since January of 2021. Cassidy was one of 7 Republican senators who voted to impeach Trump after the breach of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. 2021, Trump was ultimately acquitted by the Senate, and Cassidy has maintained that he is an effective ally to the president and the party despite their past differences. That just seems wild to me. Listen, I understand. In politics, you have to have a thick skin. In politics, you cannot let things things bother you. You're going to have to find ways to work with people who, could be dramatically different from you, who could be out there attacking you one minute and trying to work with you the next. Listen, it's not a perfect system. I understand, but we've all got to see past the details. But voting to remove a president from office is a bridge that's, I just don't know how you come back from that. You've made the decision that this guy needs to be forcibly taken out of his role as commander-in-chief. He has done something that makes him, that disqualifies him from serving as president of the United States. And then to come back and to say that you're then an ally, that's tough. It's almost like you're divorcing him and then saying that we can still be one big happy family. That's just not really the way that it works. So he was one of 7 Republican senators who voted to impeach Trump. Aside from Cassidy, only 2 of those 7 senators, that would be Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, Susan Collins from Maine, are still in the Senate. Others have left office rather than facing the long odds of a head-to-head contest against a Trump-backed opponent. However, Cassidy, who entered office in 2015, has also had more recent disputes with the president. Cassidy is the chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, leading the panel during Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation hearing. Cassidy, a doctor, had long sparred with Kennedy over the safety of infant vaccinations and whether they can lead to the development of an autism spectrum disorder. During Kennedy's confirmation hearing, Cassidy considered opposing Kennedy, but voted to support him after the two agreed on several commitments. So this is Cassidy is one that had disagreements to some degree, fine, right? To some degree, fine. There's disagreements on things, but to other, to a much larger, more importantly, I would say, when you can't say that the president of the United States, going back to the impeachment, is should remain in office. That's a tough one to come back from. So now he's not going to be senator from the state of Louisiana. So, but it's not just, of course, Cassidy that Trump's going after. It's not just Republican state senators in Indiana that Trump has gone after, who refused to redistrict mid-decade here in my state. He's now got Thomas Massie in the metaphorical crosshairs. So here we go, headline at Red State, get this loser out. That's the headline. Trump now demanding Massie primary defeat, written by Ward Clark here over the weekend at Red State. Kentucky's Republican Libertarian Representative Thomas Massie, Kentucky District 4, has been a thorn in President Trump's side throughout both of President Trump's terms, often bucking the Republican Party's mainstream positions on things like Operation Epic Fury. Now, Representative Massie is facing a tough primary fight, and President Trump, never one to suffer in silence, is urging Kentucky Republicans to show Massie the door. So, this is a poll quote here from another article that's embedded into this one. It says this: fresh off his work to oust Senators Bill Cassidy in a Louisiana primary, President Trump made a call to action against Representative Thomas Massie, urging his backers to vote out another one of his GOP critics and warning the rest of the party to align with him or risk Cassidy's fate. Here's what Trump posted in part to True Social. Tom Massie of Kentucky, the worst and most unreliable Republican congressman in the history of our country, is an even bigger insult to our nation than Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who suffered an unprecedented loss tonight by not even being allowed to run in the Republican primary, Trump wrote on Truth Social shortly after midnight. This is the first time such a thing has ever happened to a sitting U.S. senator, the president continued. That's what you get by voting to impeach an innocent man, especially one who made it possible for Cassidy's Senate win. Now, there are polls for this particular race. I see results from 5 of them right now. By the way, his primary opponent, Massie's primary opponent, is Ed Gallerine. Here are the polling data from the different polling outfits. SoCal Strategies, for example, has the race at Gowrain 49%, Massie 42%. Big Data Poll has this about 50-50. Gowrain 49%, Massie 51%. Qantas Insight has Gowrain at 53%, Massie at 45%. Big Data Poll did another one. This one goes further back, though. Those first three are more recent. So let's just focus on the first three because these others are a little bit further back. So one of these has Massie's opponent up 7. The other has Massie up 2. And the other one has Massie's opponent up 8. That's recent polling here within the past week or so. So, it's certainly possible here for there to be another victory for Trump. Now, I got to say, there are things that I do like about Massie. I think that Massie is principled. I think Massie cares about the Constitution. I think sometimes Massie is wrong, and I do believe he's been wrong on some key issues. But Trump and Massie have butted heads lots of times. And, I don't know what's going to happen here, but it certainly looks like Massie may lose as well. Now, let me say this, by the way. Typically, it's interesting to me because Massie is not the same as Cassidy. Massie is not a rhino Republican type. Massie is, in my mind, a lot like Senator Rand Paul, who's also from Kentucky, by the way. These folks are, they're libertarian. I have a lot of agreement with libertarians, but there are some key things that I think that they're simply wrong about here in practice here. But it is a different fight. Some of these folks, from Trump's perspective, opposition is opposition. Trump is not an ideological conservative. He often ends up endorsing conservative positions because I think that that's where common sense takes you once you understand the issue and so forth. But he's not an ideological conservative. So I don't know that he really sees this as an ideological war. Trump is practical. Trump sees people who are making what he's trying to do more difficult. And when they've crossed some threshold in Trump's mind, he's going to eventually come out against them. And that's what we're seeing here. But it is different, and it is worth noting, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the other side of the break, the difference between opposing people who are rhinos versus someone like Massie who's different than a rhino. So, obviously. So, timeout coming. Friends, let's be honest. When your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team to guide you each and every step of the way so you can focus on what matters most: your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life? If so, visit FullSuiteWealth.com. Do that now, FullSuiteWealth.com, my friends. Build your legacy, secure your future. Time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. So there is a difference. There's a difference between opposing someone like a Thomas Massie versus opposing someone like a Bill Cassidy. I would say most of our problems that we face today in this country, specifically in the Republican Party, I've said for a long time that there are two main problems in the Republican Party. One is that they are not conservative enough. The other is that they are wimps. They might be conservative and principled, but they don't have, many of them, this has changed a little bit, but many of them do not have the wherewithal and the just the intestinal fortitude, the inner strength to have the fight that is necessary. Look, politics, you're going to have to fight, especially when we're in this cold civil war that we're finding ourselves in. And I think that rhino Republicans are a big, big problem for the Republican Party and for the country. I see the libertarians. I've seen libertarians in a much. I see libertarians as friends to the conservative movement in most instances. As I've said before, I consider myself to have a lot in common with libertarians: small government, low taxes, the power of the individual. Those key components. There is, however, a role for government for the branches of government to have actual power. And I think that they stand on the wrong side of a few things. For the president to have actual power that's been determined by the courts and the Constitution and all that. But they're not major disagreements. I can see where they're coming from. In fact, you go back to old episodes, you'll hear me say about Rand Paul. I understand why he sometimes votes with the Democrats. I usually don't agree with him. On occasion, I might, when it comes to that situation where Democrats are opposed, Republicans are in favor, and then Rand Paul sides with the Democrats. I usually don't end up where he is, although I can see where he's coming from. I remember talking about those things on this program. That's different. That's a different problem than what we have with rhinos. Rhinos don't want to deal with the problem. Rhinos are not principled. That's a big thing to me. Rhinos aren't principled. They just sometimes want to choose the path of least resistance. These are people who oftentimes want to occupy the seat, don't really see the threat, the danger, again, what time it is in America. They don't really see any urgency. They're content with moving in the same direction, generally speaking, that Democrats are, growing government just at a slower pace, at a slower clip. And that is not acceptable to me. But from Trump's perspective, Trump doesn't look at it that way. Trump looks at it from the perspective of, I'm trying to get this done. Here are the obstacles that are preventing me from doing it. He doesn't really care if it's ideological or if it's just wimpiness or whatever. Trump just wants to stop it. And so you'll find people who oppose him on certain things for whatever their reasons are. There might be a multitude of different reasons and approaches and so forth, but you oppose him enough. I feel like he tries to give warning. I think he doesn't just drop the hammer on people. Maybe he does sometimes, but in general, I feel like Trump is actually quite forgiving as a politician, but there's a line that that a person can cross, and once he realizes I can't get accomplished what I need to get accomplished with this person in office, let's do something about it. He's reached that point with Thomas Massie. He reached that point with Bill Cassidy. From his perspective, for the same reasons, from maybe ideological, from an ideological perspective, not the same reasons, but for practical purposes, it is the same reasons, because he's just simply being opposed. And listen, our side has been notoriously bad for not doing the things that need to be done when we have the political power to do so. And it's sickening. It really is. And so it's encouraging, I would say, to see the president moving us in a direction that I agree with in very large part, and to try to do whatever he can to ensure that that happens. It's just, but it's totally different, right? Remember Reagan's unspoken rules, basically just don't speak badly about Republicans. All that stuff is out the window. We're in a new world. Social media has made that possible. I think just the things that we've been through as a country over the past, you could say several decades, but you can definitely point to COVID. You can point to, there's news out there. Attorney General Blanche is out there saying that evidence is coming that the 2020 election was absolutely rigged and stolen. So you factor these things in, it's just changed the landscape and the trajectory. Anyway, I'm out of time. I got to run. Thanks for listening, SDG.